Hi, everyone. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And our topic for tonight is neoliberalism and the climate emergency. There was a very good piece not too long ago by Thom Hartmann, which I picked up in Common Dreams. And we're going to start by going over that. Okay, but in the interim, since that appeared, something else happened. A new scientific study has come out, and I'm going to go over two articles about the results of this particular scientific study, which, if validated, greatly deepen the climate emergency. So let's go to the first piece, reasonably lengthy, by Thom Hartmann, and I'll give you my thoughts on that piece. And there it is. The headline from Common Dreams is Call on U.S. Leaders to Declare a Climate Emergency. And tagline, as the nation bakes, it is imperative that President Joe Biden take this action to mobilize powers, resources, and tools not currently available to him that could challenge Republican obstruction. This is from ThomHartmann.com, and it was originally published on July 24th, 2023 in Common Dreams. He starts, is Phoenix America's first unlivable city? Will this be the year that America and the world wakes up? I sure hope so, because it doesn't seem like anything we say or anything that anybody says or what we're experiencing. What we're experiencing itself is the evidence of the climate emergency, but we won't wake up and we won't act and we won't do anything serious about it. Anyway, going back to Tom's article, CBS News is reporting that people in Phoenix are rationing their air conditioning. A British climatologist has declared it the developed world's first, quote, uninhabitable city without air conditioning, unquote. In large parts of the United States this summer, climate change-driven heat domes are making pavement so hot that when people pass out and come in contact with it, they end up in the hospital with second and third degree burns. Multiple hospitals report that their burn units are near capacity. Dr. Kevin Forster, the director of the Arizona Burn Center, told the CBC, I guess that must be the Canadian Broadcasting Company, we are seeing lots of patients who are falling down onto the concrete, pavement, asphalt, and suffering really, really deep burns as a result of that, unquote. He added that this frequency and severity of burns is, quote again, twice the normal that we typically see, unquote. NBC News reported, quote, the burns typically occur when people fall or pass out on sun-scorched pavement and other hot surfaces during the intense heat waves as has been unfolding across the Southwest. Even being in contact with these surfaces for short periods of time can do serious damage, said Dr. Kara Guerin, an emergency medicine physician at Valley Wise Health in Phoenix. The burns can be very severe and disfiguring to the point where you have to have what's called a skin graft, where they take skin from other parts of your body and kind of cover it up, unquote, she said. That's the end of the larger quote from NBC. In 2021, 40% of Americans lived in a county severely impacted by our current climate emergency, and over 600 Americans died from climate-related causes. 2022 climate change-related weather disasters cost the United States over $165 billion, according to NOAA. This year will be the worst in human history as El Nino drives a massive summer heat wave all across the Northern Hemisphere. The United Nations has estimated that climate-related deaths will exceed cancer deaths in our children's lifetimes. Isn't that amazing? Climate-related deaths are going to exceed cancer deaths. Going back to the article, we stand on the precipice of a disaster unlike any that humanity has ever encountered. And a small group of fossil fuel billionaires and coal barons are getting fabulously rich from humanity's misery while actively working to block sanctions. To block solutions. How do they block the solutions? Well, they're using small parts of that revenue with the blessing of 5 corrupt Republicans on the Supreme Court to pay off Republican politicians and a handful of Democrats to block any efforts to solve this crisis. I guess I have to ask about that paragraph. What happened to the 6th corrupt Republican on the Supreme Court? I'm trying to figure out who that one is because last I looked, even John Roberts seemed to have some skeletons in his closet when it comes to the corruption front. So I'm wondering who the 6th Republican is who somehow escaped this condemnation by Thom Hartmann. What makes it imperative that President Joe Biden declared a climate emergency to mobilize powers, resources, and tools not currently available to him that could challenge their obstruction. These include the National Emergencies Act, the Defense Production Act, and the Robert T. Stafford Relief and Emergency Assistance Act. In 2019, the Center for Biological Diversity published a legal analysis summarizing the powers available to the president were he to declare a climate emergency. They include ban new fossil fuel leasing, ban new fracking permits, establish a plan to phase out fossil fuel production, reallocate hundreds of billions of dollars currently subsidizing fossil fuel production towards the deployment of green energy, cap domestic fossil fuel emissions, end the export of crude oil, coal, and refined fossil fuel products. So, these are powers available to the president, but he won't declare the climate emergency. They further suggest that the president veto any legislation that provides immunity from lawsuits to the fossil fuel industry. Now, the GOP is working on this, says Thom, and begin a comprehensive and systematic investigation into the fossil fuel industry's cover-up of science they've known and concealed for decades about the planet-destroying consequences of their products. When America entered World War II, we shifted large portions of America's industrial infrastructure towards the production of war material. Factories that once made cars began to manufacture tanks and airplanes. Industrial facilities producing clothing or nylon stockings turned out millions of uniforms and parachutes. Food, fuel, and even tires were rationed to provide for the war effort. This was largely done by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt using his wartime emergency powers, and the Center for Biological Diversity argues, using peacetime emergency powers today, President Biden could put America on a similarly consequential course to be free of most fossil fuel pollution within a decade. Not only would this have a major impact on climate change, I guess I have to repeat that, within a decade, by 2033, if Biden would do something, not only would this have a major impact on climate change, because America is one of the planet's two largest polluters, but it would also set an example for the world to follow. President Biden considered declaring such an emergency last year, but stepped back from it. As Varshini Prakash, executive director of the Sunrise Movement, told Bloomberg, quote, New York City looks like it's on fire. Kids are choking on dirty air. And the air quality index is a serious health threat equivalent to breathing in smoke from cigarettes. We're in a climate emergency, and it's absurd that our government isn't acting like it, unquote. Now, Republicans are fully aware of this potential, which is why they just introduced legislation to block President Biden from declaring such an emergency. Fortunately, that's not going to become law. But, to go on with the article, cynically, they've named their bill the Real Emergencies Act. You'll recall that just last week, Republican Congressman Scott Perry called climate change a, quote, grift, unquote. As Julia Rock notes at The Lever, quote, the Real Emergencies Act 7 sponsors in the Senate received a combined $3.1 million in contributions from fossil fuel industry executives and political action committees over the 2017 to 2022 cycle, according to data from Open Secrets. And I gotta wonder, depart from the quote for a minute, I gotta wonder how much money was spent on behalf of these particular senators by super PACs. I'm sure it was quite a bit more than the 3.1 million in contributions. The bill's, going on with the quote, the bill's 19 House sponsors raked in 1.7 million from fossil fuel executives and PACs during the 2021 to 2022 election cycle. One of the great tragedies of Clarence Thomas casting the deciding vote in Citizens United is that today the cost of robbing politicians represents only a tiny fraction of the profits industry can receive when those politicians do what they are asked. I wonder why Dee Piers is not here right now. Excuse me a second. I'm going to check my Facebook and see if there's some message from her. I left the link to the show. Anyway, she's late, of course. So I expected her. Let's see if she's in the comments. Nope, she's not. There's Kay Ryan. Hi, Kay. How you doing? And Robert Copeland. I heard that the waters off the coast of Florida were at 101 degrees, and the Gulf jet stream may collapse in 2025. Yes, Robert. Yes, Robert. We'll be talking about that later on. One of the great tragedies of Clarence Thomas casting a deciding vote in Citizens United is that today the cost of bribing politicians represents only a tiny fraction of the profits industry can receive when those politicians do what they are asked to do by their donors. Invest a few $1,000,000, make hundreds of billions. The fossil fuel barons succeeded in buying so much of the GOP that it's almost impossible to find any Republican official who will even acknowledge climate change, much less is willing to do anything serious about it. I suppose there are a few exceptions to that, maybe Lisa Murkowski, maybe Susan Collins. There's probably a Republican in the House, Thomas Massie, since he's a scientist, who will acknowledge climate change. With Democratic control of the Senate intact, however, this corrupt attempt by these Republicans, the Real Emergencies Act, to prevent President Biden from saving the lives of Americans, will not become law. Well, we got to remember that there are at least two Democrats who are probably in favor of that act, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. But just stopping Republican obstruction isn't enough. Of course, there is the filibuster, in the Senate, and these two probably won't want to give away the filibuster for the sake of passing this bill. But the past week, over 100 million Americans were subjected to deadly levels of heat, and because warmer air holds more moisture and more energy, the storms and floods unleashed on America have been unprecedented in both their frequency, volume, and violence. And it's going to get worse, a lot worse. And I add to that, yes, this summer it's going to get a lot worse. We're in the middle here in DC of 4 straight days where the real feel is going to be way in excess of 100 degrees. Today was day 1, and tomorrow, Saturday and Sunday, we're not going to get any relief into a more normal situation until Monday. It looks like Dee has arrived. Hey, Dee, I've been looking for you.
I'm happy to be here. Took a while to finish up the show, but we finished it.
Okay, thank you for coming. I'm sure there was a lot of entertainment towards the end of that show.
Oh, it's too much. And like I said from the start, you can't make this stuff up.
Okay, so I'm in the middle of reading the Thom Hartmann piece and making the comments on it. And I just got through pointing out, in response to an assertion by Thom Hartmann that it's going to get a lot worse, a lot worse. I pointed out that here in the DC area, we've got 4 days coming up, of which this was the first day, where the real feel is in the 100 to 110 degree range. The I think the high, just in the sheer temperature reading on one of those days, is going to rise to 99. So we've got to pretty much spend the time indoors for those 4 days. We'll get some relief on Monday, evidently, and on Tuesday, and that's going to be good. But still,
It's too much. And, I always think about the people that don't have a home. Or what about the people that can't afford air conditioning?
yes, I think of them too, especially since the first part of this article, Thom begins by talking about people who fall down on the pavement and get second degree and third degree burns out of it. And if they happen to be unlucky enough to collapse, not just fall, but collapse from the heat, that can be a life threatening situation very, very easily. Anyway, to go on with Thom's article, this truly is a climate emergency, and every day that goes by without significant action that further endangers the future of almost all life on Earth, including us. Reach out to your elected officials and ask them to demand that President Biden declare a climate emergency and take action now. The bought and paid for Republican shills for the fossil fuel industry in Congress will react with hysterical squeals and threats of congressional action. Their threats, however, are hollow. Now is
But
the time
Biden,
for action.
it is a time for action, but Biden, he himself is collecting money from the fossil fuel industry. So he says things,
He's
Biden,
been collecting considerable money from the fossil fuel industry, and he's continuing to do things to expand the activities of the fossil fuel industry. And we would also be remiss not to say that it's not just the bought and paid for Republican shills for the fossil fuel industries. We have some Democrats who are bought and paid for shills for the fossil fuel industry too. And not just Manchin and Sinema. There are some more who are bought, okay, and paid for, especially in the House, but even, okay, in the Senate. I bet there are at least 10 senators who can be prevailed upon by the fossil fuel industry uh, to vote along with them rather than voting, okay, along with the people, and rather than voting to contain, not just to contain, but to end the threat uh, coming from the climate emergency. It is certainly time for action, okay, right now. As Senator Jeff Merkley told the Washington Post, this is a planetary emergency, and the president should declare an emergency. It is the biggest issue facing humankind. We are on a trajectory for a massive increase in climate chaos, affecting us in every possible way. One of the best ways to lobby the president is through Democratic members of the House and Senate. The message to President Biden has to be, you have the power to use it. You must use it. You have the power to do this. You must use it, unquote.
but he's had the power on several issues, several things, and he never seems to use the power he has.
He never seems to use the power he has, and that is one of the very worst things about his presidency. He won't use the power he has. He has been in certain circles favorably compared to Franklin Roosevelt. That is total baloney. Franklin Roosevelt always used the power he had. He kept pushing that power to the limit. That's how he got all those things done. That's how he created the modern presidency. Joe Biden is a throwback to Herbert Hoover. Sorry, Herbert Hoover. The number for the Congressional Switchboard is 202-224-3121. Most members of Congress also allow constituents to email them through their websites, which you can easily find with a quick web search. Take a few minutes and make the call. The fate of our planet, our fellow humans, and future generations is hanging in the balance. Well, I agree with that call, and I agree we should all make it, but I also have to point out, why are we in the situation we are in? Because for decades, the big money in Congress has been blocking any action on fossil fuels and the burning, of fossil fuels, any substantial action anyway. And they've been blocking it because they've been bought. Thom points out that the whole Republican Party is bought. And I've indicated that a good many Democrats, are also bought. We have been seeing, as we've gone over the record of many House Democrats and also Senate Democrats, we see the contributions and the super PAC activities coming from the fossil fuel industry. These people are bought. Everyone is afraid of their power. And as a result of that, they won't do what's necessary to do. We here are carrying on a campaign focused on dumping the corruption, where dumping the corruption means where it means following a very simple rule to get toxic money out, of politics. And even though I do this very often, I'm going to do it again because
And I just want to say that it's so important for us to vote third-party candidates or anybody that's not taking the money. You have to say the gig is up. They're going to keep this gig going. It is a good gig for them. They're getting a lot of money from these industries, and we're the ones that are being harmed.
they are getting quite a lot of money from these industries, and we are being harmed. But I do want to emphasize, it is not really about the third parties as opposed to the two major parties. Uh, I would be perfectly happy if people running under the Republican banner and people running under the Democratic banner who wouldn't take any of the big money, I'd be perfectly happy if people voted for them. The critical thing is whether people are taking the money. Now, I also want to emphasize, though, as an operational matter, because all the Republicans and all the Democrats are taking big money. If you followed the rule that is on the screen now, it would result in the defeat of all the Democrats and all the Republicans, because every one of them we've tested is taking big money.
Right. We couldn't find anybody that wasn't taking the
We
big
couldn't
money.
find anybody who wasn't taking the big money. And we're going to examine people in more detail in future Dump the Corruption streams as well. But I am quite sure that every single one of them is taking the big money, because we looked at the leading advocates for small donations in both the House and the Senate, and even they were taking a lot of individual contributions from well-off people. There was nobody relying on small donations alone. But let us read the rule once again. Vote against every candidate except those who won't take money from wealthy corporations, individuals, PACs, or party committees. Why party committees? Because a lot of the wealthy people and wealthy corporations funnel their money through the party committees. Then they go to individual candidates. But the individual candidates know that that money has come from the wealthy corporations and the wealthy individuals. And they're mindful of that when they vote either for or against things that wealthy people and wealthy corporations want. Okay. Finally, final part of the sentence, and who repudiate all super PAC support. Right now, nobody repudiates super PAC support. And the super PACs are going crazy in primary fights, okay, and election fights. It has to be stopped. The toxic money has to be gone out of politics. We can do it ourselves if we look at the fundraising records of people available in open secrets. You can look at the record of people who are running for seats in your districts, or running for the Senate in your states, or running for state and local office, and you can find out who they're taking money from. And you can find out whether they're taking big money. It's there. And when you find out, you should follow the rule. I know you're going to want to make some exceptions because you like this person or that person or the other person, or for this reason or that reason or the other reason, or you've met a congressperson and they seem like they're fine people. I know you're going to want to do that. I urge that you don't do that, that you follow the rule, because the important thing is not to get any particular individuals out of politics. It's not to defeat any particular individuals. It's to defeat the money, to make the money toxic. And you can't do that except by following the rule. So the candidates in the next election won't take the big money, so that they will confine themselves to small donations only from individuals. That is what has to happen. Small donations are donations less than $200. Everybody has to run on that. You might ask, why not pass a law requiring that? That's the easy way to do it. No, it's not the easy way to do it, because nobody's going to vote for that.
Mm-hmm.
That law is never going to get through. And you can't get through constitutional amendments either. You can take individual action by yourself. And if you join with other people across the country, you can make it the equivalent, okay, of illegal to take large, big money contributions from anybody. That lies within our power, but we have to act together as one for that to happen. So please keep that in mind. What I want to do now is go to two other articles which happen to appear, which I noticed actually today. I was planning on spending time only going over the Hartmann article today, because I thought it was such a good article. But there are two more articles that underline the urgency of doing what Thom Hartmann suggested. So let me share the first one.
Mm-hmm.
That's about a study that was recently completed This appeared in Common Dreams. You can guess from the photo, it's about the climate. It's about the Gulf Stream. But the Gulf Stream is part of something larger. Study warns climate-driven collapse of critical ocean current system. Quote, much closer than we thought. Said one researcher, quote, it's very plausible that we've fallen off a cliff already and don't know it, unquote. This piece was by Brett Wilkins from Common Dreams, July 25th, 2023. It's reporting both on a study and an article which appeared in The Guardian. Starts off, the system of Atlantic Ocean currents to drive warm water from the tropics toward Europe is at risk of collapsing in coming decades. An analysis of 150 years of temperature data published Tuesday concluded the Atlantic Meridional Overturning circulation, the AMOC, which includes the Gulf Stream, quote, is a major tipping element in the climate system, and a future collapse would have severe impacts on the climate in the North Atlantic region, states the study, which was published in the scientific journal Nature Communications. Sorry, I scrolled down a little too fast. Although the analysis notes that, quote, assessments by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, based on the Climate Model Intercomparison Project, CMIP, model simulations suggest that a full collapse is unlikely within the 21st century. The study's authors, quote, estimate a collapse of the AMOC to occur around mid-century under the current scenario of future emissions. We have to note here, usually the scenarios of future emissions are too conservative. And we've seen that those estimates are always too cautious. And they're probably still too cautious. Anyway, going on, quote, we show that a transition of the AMOC is most likely to occur around 2025 to 2095. The paper states with 95% confidence. And David Wallace Wells, famous writer on the climate, says, there is still large uncertainty where the AMOC tipping point is, but the new study adds to the evidence that it is much closer than we thought. That's the Guardian article. I guess that must be.
And they don't, and people don't think that, it's anything is going to happen.
I know. They just won't believe that anything is going to happen, but it will happen. The Gulf Stream could collapse as early as 2025, the study suggests.
Right, and that's right around the corner.
2 years from now. A collapse would bring catastrophic climate impact, but scientists disagree over the new analysis. Of course they do. University of Copenhagen professor Peter Ditlevsen, who led the study, told The Guardian, quote, I think we should be very worried. This would be a very, very large change. The AMOC has not been shut off for 12,000 years, unquote. Bill McKibben, co-founder of the Climate Action Group, 350.org, tweeted that, quote, Gulf Stream collapse used to be viewed as far off and remote possibility. Less so now, unquote. Okay, and meteorologist and climate journalist Eric Holthouse called the study's findings incredibly worrying, and he tweeted, "Wow, I'm having trouble processing this news. This is incredibly worrying." And he tweeted that. It was actually a quote tweet of a tweet by Damien Carrington. Gulfstream system could collapse as early as 2025, study suggests. An Atlantic shutdown would bring catastrophic climate impacts, but scientists disagree over the new analysis. Okay, so it turns out the story was by Damien Carrington, the story in The Guardian. The Washington Post reports the new quote, the new study adds to a growing body of evidence that this crucial ocean system is in peril. Since 2004, observations from a network of ocean buoys have shown the AMOC getting weaker, though the limited time frame of that data set makes it hard to establish a trend. Scientists have also analyzed multiple proxy, quote unquote, indicators of the current strength, including microscopic organisms and tiny sediments from the seafloor, to show the system is in its weakest state in more than 1,000 years. By the way, 1,000 years ago, there was a little ice age. I guess, yeah, I think it did start about 1,000 years ago, the little ice age. It started, I think, 1,200 or 1,300 or something like that. For thousands of years, the Gulf Stream has carried warm waters from the Gulf of Mexico northward along the eastern North American seaboard and across the Atlantic to Europe. As human-caused global heating melts the Greenland ice sheet, massive quantities of fresh water are released into the North Atlantic, cooling the AMOC, which delivers the bulk of the Gulf Stream's heat toward a tipping point that could stop the current in its tracks. According to The Guardian, a collapse of AMOC would have disastrous consequences around the world, severely disrupting the rains that billions of people depend on for food in India, South America, and West Africa. It would increase storms and drop temperatures in Europe and lead to a rising sea level on the eastern coast of North America. It would also further endanger the Amazon rainforest and the Antarctic ice sheets. Quote, it is very plausible that we've fallen off a cliff already and don't know it, unquote. Haley Kilborn, an associate research professor at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, that, by the way, is right here in the Washington, D.C. area, told the New York Times, I fear, honestly, that by the time any of this is settled science, it's way too late to act. Dr. Daniel Swain said, on the new AMOC study that's currently making a splash, even fairly low odds of something dramatic happening with global ocean overturning circulations this century is still a really big deal. This new study does not single-handedly shift understanding, but it is still unsettling.
But they're sleeping.
Sorry, go ahead.
Everyone's sleeping.
Everyone's sleeping. And people have got to stop sleeping. Okay, especially politically. People have to get out into the streets. And they have to come to Washington. And they have to demand that things be done. But I have to tell you, I encourage getting out into the streets because it changes the political climate and changes it, okay, in a good way. If if millions of people get out into the streets, it does tend to affect things. It brings out, anyway, the debate. But I still believe that getting out to the streets is not going to scare the congresspeople and the senators who are bought by the fossil fuel interests. They will still resist up to the last moment. If we want to have something done, the only way is to get rid of the toxic money. And the only way to do that is to vote against everybody who takes it. So,
Right, because we've seen it in one case after the other.
yes.
No matter what the topic is, the big money controls the situation.
Yeah. We have seen that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez takes considerable money from well-off people. We have seen Katie Porter, another super fundraiser among House people, takes considerable money from well-off people, large donations in excess of $200. Okay, now the majority of both of their donations comes from small donations less than or equal to $200. But still, very heavy percentage of their money comes from well-off people. And some comes from PACs and super PACs as well. Going on. Meanwhile, in the Southern Hemisphere, sorry, I got a little pop-up on my screen here. Other studies, including one published in March and another in 2022, have also concluded that the AMOC is at risk of collapsing this century. But this new study says it could collapse as early as 2025. Meanwhile, in the Southern Hemisphere, Antarctic currents that enrich 40% of Earth's deep oceans with oxygen and nutrients essential for marine life have slowed dangerously in recent decades and could also collapse by mid-century. An Australian study released in May showed. So I'm going to stop sharing this because there's a third article.
Okay.
Here. And the third article talks about something very important. Specifically, it talks about what to do about it.
Yes, and that's important. What to do? What can we do?
What can we do? Let me find
Because
this.
basically no one is listening. People have been talking about this for so long, and no one is listening. They'll give you mouth service, but that's about it. Vote
A
for
lot of lip
us.
service. There's a lot of lip service, but there's no action. And when it comes to legislation introduced in the Congress to take action, it goes right to committee where it's pigeonholed, never gets to the floor for a floor vote. Okay. In the Senate, it's all blocked by the filibuster. Nothing ever happens. This is a visualization of ocean currents in the North Atlantic, with orange and yellow representing warmer sea surface temperatures, and green and blue colored ones, lower surface temperatures. So you can see that what's going on here is we're getting predominantly yellow and green and very little blue. Yes, the ocean is cooking. And it's cooking the wildlife in the ocean too. Threat of AMOC collapse begs question. If not now, then when? If not us, then who? We must use this as a catalyst for massive behavior change and mass forms of protest to force our corrupt officials to rapidly decarbonize the economy by 2030, not 2050. This is by Simon Wally for Common Dreams on July 26th, 2023. Again, what this is about is mass forms of protests to force our corrupt officials to rapidly decarbonize the economy. Mass forms of protests, like going into the streets, while again changing the environment in a very important way, is very unlikely to force our corrupt officials to rapidly decarbonize, the economy. I mean, I want to see it. I don't want to discourage it, at all. I want it to be a catalyst for change. But the only thing that's going to force, the corruption out and get the new officials to look at the reality, is the realization that if they take the money, they're going to be out. So they might as well seek support from the people by doing things that will improve the lives, of people. And the most important thing they could do is to put people over profits and to forget the neoliberal philosophy that says profits over people. But let's get into Wally's piece, because it's an excellent piece. If the searing heat and record flooding aren't enough to get us moving towards a net zero carbon world, then surely waking up to the news that the AMOC could potentially collapse within 3 years is just the ticket. So far this summer, extreme heat has killed hundreds of people in Mexico, Greece, Cyprus, Algeria, Spain, Italy, and China. Greece is once again on fire. Nova Scotia is underwater. And the hottest day ever recorded on Earth was broken not once, not twice, but 3 days in a row. Then on July 26, 2023, people around the world woke up to the worst possible news imaginable. The AMOC is likely to collapse by the middle of the century, with a time scale for collapse between 2025 and 2095. Some people will perhaps not understand the magnitude of what this means, so let's start at the beginning. What is the AMOC? It is a complex system of currents responsible for keeping our climate relatively stable and transporting carbon and nutrients. As warm water near the ocean surface gets pushed northwards, it warms Europe on its way to the North Pole, where it forms sea ice. The salt gets left in the ocean, and due to its salinity, it becomes dense and then drops to the ocean floor, where it moves south before being pulled back up to the surface to warm up again. This cycle can take 1,000 years to complete. Yet research in 2021 warned that the AMOC, quote, could be close to a critical transition to its weak circulation mode. In other words, there's a strong circulation mode for it and a weak circulation mode for it. And historically, it has gotten into weak circulation mode with drastic climate effects. Fast forward just 2 years, says the article, and the new study is alarming climate scientists even further. So we know what it is, but what will happen if it collapses? And here's a diagram showing the currents, showing the North Atlantic current, and showing how it warms Europe, and it warms Canada too. It branches off here, and part of it is warming the northern parts of the United States, but a big part of it is warming Europe, northern states
Mhm.
of Europe, such as the UK, um, 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 Ireland, Sweden, also Finland, parts of France are warmed up also. Generally speaking, the nations of Western Europe and part of Eastern Europe have a decent climate because of the AMOC. In short, climate systems all around the world will be altered irreversibly. Research in nature climate change found that surface cooling will begin over the North Atlantic and expand Arctic sea ice before moving into the North Pacific and spreading south toward the tropics. This would result in the Pacific Ocean entering into a permanent La Nina phase, which could cause disastrous monsoons and flooding in the South Pacific and increased drought and heat in North America.
Mm.
The last time the AMOC came to a near stop was at the end of the last ice age, 14,500 years ago, when the northern hemisphere was hurled back into a 3,000-year freeze.
Oh my goodness.
Europe is projected to witness more frequent winter storms and see more summer heat brought up from the south, with southern Europe becoming even drier, meaning more wildfires and intense heat waves. As southern Europe bakes, northern Europe will see increased precipitation, although it has been found that much of the UK's arable land would rapidly become unproductive. South Asia will experience a weakening of monsoon circulation, and rainfall in Asia and Africa will be effective. The collapse of the AMOC will impact every continent, and Tim Lenton, director of the Global Systems Institute at the University of Exeter, said, quote, "This study is yet another warning that we should be doing everything in our power to accelerate action to decarbonize the economy and get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible," unquote. Does anyone care to imagine what such a combination of climatic changes will do to the world's agricultural yields, making the world hungrier, poorer, and more politically unstable? So we know what the AMOC is, and the impact its collapse will have on us. So now what? There will be
Oh, we'll be dead.
yeah, we'll be dead. There will be those who will say it's too late. There will be those who say it's fake news. And there will be those who are terrified. I fit into the last group. For the first time in my activist life, I found myself with tears rolling down my cheeks silently this morning while producing a 520-page book that paints an extremely alarming picture of our future. I remained stoical throughout the research and writing, only to finally succumb to tears a year after its publication. This is not the time to give up, though. Whether the AMOC collapses in 2025 or 2095, we must use this as a catalyst for massive behavior change and mass forms of protest to force our corrupt officials to rapidly decarbonize the economy by 2030, not 2050. I have to add here that a massive form of protest, one massive form of protest, is to dump the corruption
We
by
have to.
voting by voting out all officials who take the big money and all candidates who are taking the big money. In other words, only small donations allowed. That will get the big money out of politics, and that mass protest by us will greatly increase the likelihood that the legislatures will take climate action that means something, that they will finally look at proposals like the Green New Deal and they will pass those proposals, because the money that stops them from passing it now, the donors that stop them from passing it now, their influence on the political system will
Hmm.
be much reduced. Sure, they'll be able to pay for studies and for ads and for all kinds of things protesting this because they have the money, and we cannot stop that.
I mean,
But
your life literally depends on it.
our life literally depends on it. And the people, huh? Yes, their lives too. Everybody's lives will depend on this. If we get that money out, though, the point is that the legislators will not belong to the donors anymore. They will have to look to us for support. And then they had better be doing something about the climate. Simon Wiley goes on, a simple change we can all make is to our diets. Research from Oxford University last week found that plant based diets reduce land use by 75%. So, by leaving animals off our plates, we can free up 3/4 of the land we currently use for farming. This will sequester between 1/3 and 2/3 of our current emissions every year. It will also provide habitat for wild animals that are becoming extinct, largely due to our carnivorous habit. In addition, plant based diets reduce biodiversity impact by 66%. As a bonus, agricultural water use, currently 70% of total freshwater use, will be halved. Agricultural greenhouse gas emissions will be slashed by 75%. And with agriculture being the second largest greenhouse gas contributor at around 30%, individuals can reduce their emissions by 22.5% just by switching a knife for a fork. As the
Hmm.
cherry on the cake, eutrophication will be reduced by 73%, and the pain and suffering of trillions of sentient beings every year will be ended, and our oceans will once again flourish. Those of us who can afford to pay slightly more for our energy can also switch suppliers to a renewable electricity provider. And by the way, we'll only pay slightly more at the start, because in the long run, the renewable electricity providers will be able to provide energy at a lower cost, not a higher cost. This can reduce your emissions by another 20%, almost getting us to the IPCC goal of 45% cuts by 2030. This cannot be the target anymore. We must aim for carbon neutrality by 2030. I have to point out, we have only 7 years to get there, and in the United States, we can't do anything until 2025, until we get this Congress out and this president out and get anybody out who is bought by the donors. That's going to mean all the Republicans and all the Democrats. I mean, I can tell you right now. Okay. Unless some of them along the way take us seriously and mend their ways and stop taking the big money. They can do that. And there might be some other Democrats and Republicans who take their place, but the only ones that will get through are those that don't take the big money. That's okay. Democrats and Republicans are not, okay, inherently bad, at least not all of them. Their terrible performance that we've been seeing over the last 50 years has been due to neoliberalism and to the role of the donors in neoliberal politics. Once we get rid of that toxic money, we won't have trouble from those folks anymore. This is where people power has to take center stage. We cannot allow the billionaire class and their paid for representatives to destroy our ecosystems for record profits without a fight. We must act like we have 3 years to save ourselves, because potentially we do. Regardless of the date of collapse of the AMOC, our children deserve better. Their parents and grandparents have failed them. Their teachers have failed them. Their politicians have failed them. We must ask ourselves, quote, if not now, then when? If not us, then who? Unquote. So,
I'm just shaking my head here. It's as if they don't care. And they don't care about their own family.
sorry, say that again, Dee.
It's like they don't realize, like, and Bonnie was brought up about, their families too. It's just not like it's everybody else that's affected. They're
It's their
affected, and their
families too.
families are, and they don't seem to. I don't know this. They can't think ahead. They're just thinking about keeping their, I guess, their seats and whatever, whether they're in the House or the Senate. They're just concerned about that, not concerned about a future.
I think the public opinion polls are showing that there are a majority of Americans, a substantial majority, in favor of doing something about the climate, okay, and doing it fast. Okay, there's actually majority support for a Green New Deal right now, as public opinion polls are showing. However, we can't get our legislatures, generally speaking, to act. We have gotten some local legislatures and state level legislatures to act in certain areas. But, I mean, federally, we're close to zero in getting anything effective done. And we have to get the federal government, the state level legislatures to act, and in major urban areas, the local legislatures to act as well. And that means getting that toxic money out of the system so the
It
rich
does.
cannot do it anymore.
It's really shameful. It really is.
Let's go. It's criminal. It's shameful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's criminal. It can't be allowed to continue to go on. And the key to that is stopping the flow of the money. Robert Copeland says, I heard the waters off the coast of Florida was at 101 degrees and the Gulf Jet airstream could collapse in 2025. Yes, of course, we covered that. The 101 degrees in Florida, I understand, was, okay, in Manatee Bay. Specifically, there's an article that if you took a dip in the water, okay, at Manatee Bay, it would be like a hot tub experience. K. Ryan says, yes, Robert. And K says, hi, D. And D says, hi, K. K says, very hot here in Ohio. Very hot here in Virginia, too, K. And Robert in Northern Virginia. I'm sure it's very hot in Southern Virginia, too. Robert Coleman says last September, Sacramento set an all time record of 116 degrees. And last winter, we had too much rain. And Kay says, yes, he should. Copeland says President Biden is a corporate Democrat who was funded by big corporations. Absolutely, Robert, absolutely. Andy Candy says, hi guys, blessed be all. The problem is it's getting too damn hot to get out in the streets. It's too late to march. Your plan is the only hope, although voting is under attack as well. Well, voting can be under attack, but if you vote against, if everybody votes against, every member of Congress and every legislator at all levels who is taking big money, they won't be able to falsify the returns by that much. Because we're talking about, having basically pluralities in elections of 99% for throwing the people out who are taking the big money, and 99% against the new candidates who are running, who are also taking big money. I mean, you're talking about it being almost universal. They can't rig it by that much. Also, a lot of their favorite rigging tactics, like, take the tactic of suppressing the vote. That can swing things in elections maybe by 10% or something like that, but not more than that. With the kind of universal movement that we're suggesting here, that's not going to be successful in stopping the landslide. It's not. It's not going to be successful in stopping the landslide vote for third party people who don't take the big money. So, voting is under attack, but not by that much that it could resist this kind of mass effort that I'm talking about. Andy Kennedy says, hi, Kay, thanks. And Kay says, hi, and YW. And Robert Copeland says, well, I have to leave now to chat. So chat with you later. Okay, Robert, glad you're here. Andy Kennedy says, no problem for me. I stopped buying meat years ago. Science has developed the ability to clone meat for those that absolutely must have it. Russ Goldman says, there is a problem with plant-based. Oil has to be mined and processed into fertilizer so the plants can have, but can have minimal trace amounts of nutrients. 12 years ago, when agriculture started, the topsoils were 9 to 15 feet deep. Today, they are non-existent and severely depleted. The ruminants eat grass. Can we not grow plants, in other ways? Can we not turn to aquaponics to get the plants we need? I think we probably can. And Andy Candy said, the rich don't suffer, therefore they don't care for anyone else. Well, they will suffer and die too. Rich people do go out of their houses from time to time. They want to go for dinner. They do walk on pavements. They can fall down and get second-degree burns and also third-degree burns. Also, it's not much of a life to continuously have to stay in the house, have to stay indoors, have to stay in controlled environments and never go outside.
They have to wear gloves on their hands to protect them from metals that they touch.
Yes. It can be very bad for rich people too. Andy Kennedy says, I wonder we can order DTC t-shirts printed and ordered cheaply from China. Yeah, we probably can. Okay, I need someone to handle that kind of thing for me because I don't. Okay, I really don't have the time to do that sort of thing. In fact, I really need to expand my team considerably. Okay, I need people to help with graphics. Okay, I also need a producer. Okay, in other words, the successful people, okay, on the web are working with producers. Okay, I need someone to do that for me. Dee needs someone to do it for her too. We both need more people working with us. And we got to find a way to make that work. And Ghost Art says, no worries, Greta's teamed with Adolf Hitler to solve climate change. Not sure who Greta is in this instance. Russell Gorman said 12,000 years ago. Yeah, 12,000 years ago indeed. Andy Candy says fish are boiling in the waters, and fish skin is important for burns. Yes, the fish are boiling in the waters. They are.
It's terrible. It really is.
It is. We're in a very tight spot, and we got to start acting immediately. And this old guy in the White House, okay, I'm 84 years old. Okay. I'll be the last person to be, okay, an ageist. But as people get older, there are some who are still able to function, and there are others who just are not able to function. The President of the United States is a big, big job. Okay, and we need to have someone, okay, in that office who is fully functional when it comes to decision making, who is fully functional when it comes to learning, who is fully functional when it comes to commanding, and who will use all the power that person has. We also need such people, okay, in Congress. It seems to me Mitch McConnell is getting a little old in the, I should say, long in the tooth. Is the expression. Okay, Nancy Pelosi has stepped down, but of course, she selected someone as her successor who is just like her in terms of his views and his opinions and what he supports. And of the people in Congress who had the power to block Hakeem Jeffries from taking over leadership of the Democratic Party did not do that. Why didn't they do that? It was because of money. It was because Nancy Pelosi and Hakeem Jeffries raised. Oh, Greta Thunberg. That's who you were talking about. I'm sorry. I didn't make the connection. Okay, immediately go start. So, it was because of the money. The money rules the Congress. It rules the Congress by ruling the leaders, and not just the very top leaders, but the committee chairs. Okay, the people who are not simply backbenchers in Congress, but who have been there for some time and have a measure of power, they're all bought. And the president, as we know, is bought. We knew that when we were voting for him, or when some were voting for him because they couldn't stand Trump. I'm not suggesting that anybody vote for Trump. I am unalterably opposed to Trump, but I am unalterably opposed to Biden, okay, as well. So many policies instituted by Trump were kept by Joe Biden. You can see some differences. They're not always to the good. For example, it's doubtful that Trump would have gotten us into the Ukraine war. It's doubtful that Trump would have blown up the Nord Stream pipeline. Okay, it's doubtful that Trump would have created a situation where millions of people are having trouble with food because grain is not coming out of the Ukraine. Uh, so Biden has done some terrible things that Trump probably would not have done. Uh, Trump would have done a lot of other very terrible things that
Mm-hmm.
probably wouldn't have liked very much here. But increasingly, as things are unrolling in this administration, uh, like for example, one of the biggest problems with Trump was that he was always making deals to enrich his cronies and his family. Well, guess what? Increasingly, news is coming out that Joe Biden has been doing exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and a whole bunch of other things that he and Trump have in common. What's the problem? All those folks are driven by money. We have to get people in there who are not driven by money. That has to happen. Okay,
And we
D.
don't have much time. I was going to say, we don't have much time. I mean, this is just urgent.
Yeah, we have no time. I mean, we have no time. Okay, if we were able, according to the rules, to get Biden out now, through impeachment. But if we used impeachment, what would we have?
Oh, gosh.
We would have Paris, which all indications are might be worse than Biden. She'd certainly keep in many of the same officials. All the Hillary Clinton crowd that's in there with Biden right now would stay there.
Right. And she'd just let them run the show, and she would just do,
Yeah,
things out in the public and whatever.
she'd
Public
go around
appearance.
the country cackling.
Yes.
Okay, and okay, but then if she were impeached, who's next in line?
Mm.
Kevin McCarthy. So even if we kept impeaching people, it would be a long time before we got to a good person to run the country. And of course, to impeach people, you need the corrupt Congress people to do the impeaching and to do the conviction. And therefore, some of the corrupt people are certainly going to survive. So we're stuck, in the absence of a revolution, we're stuck until 2024. And things won't then start to change until 2025.
Right. And that could be the end.
Andy says, isn't Trump in the same age bracket as Joe? No, there's about 8 years different between Trump, okay, and also Joe Biden. So, those 8 years can make a big difference, okay, in the functioning of a person. Andy Candy says, so war with Syria, goddess forbid McCarthy. Goddess indeed forgive McCarthy.
Forbid McCarthy, exactly.
Yeah, my God.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's too much.
Yes, it is too much. It is too much.
And
So,
this is reality. This is
we
reality.
do, okay, we do have to get out there with mass movements, mass actions of various kinds to change the environment in the United States.
Yeah.
Because if people see an end coming to the regime we have now, which is governed by money, then when we get to the election of 2024, it will be that much easier to get people to come together to get toxic money out of politics, to vote against the toxic money at all levels. And the mass movements, the mass protests, the mass actions are needed to change the environment and get people ready to make the key decision to vote against everybody who's taking the big money.
yes.
Ghostart says Putin announced 25 to 50,000 tons of free grain for Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia, Central African Republic, and Eritrea. Why partner with untrustworthy partners to get the job done? Yeah, Putin is a smart cookie. He often knows just what to do. Oh, by the way, people have been accusing me lately of being a Putin puppet, a PP, a Putin puppet.
You had to explain your
I'm
hat
waiting for
tonight.
my check. I'm sitting here waiting for my check. I'm waiting for
And the
my
hat,
check from Vlad.
yes, and you had to explain your hat the other night, 2 nights ago.
I'm sorry, I should explain what?
No, you had to explain your hat a couple of nights ago.
Oh, your
Oh, yeah, my hat was taken as an indication that I was a Putin puppet. But what my hat actually represents is membership in the Red Berets for Medicare for All movement. Okay, I'm a Red Beret for Medicare for All. That's why I wear the Red Beret all the time. It got nothing to do with Putin. Andy Candy says, it seems like Arizona folks would be the first to march as soon as it rains. Gorsat says, the U.S. coup got couped in Niger. I don't know who did the final cooing in Niger. Andy Candy says, Africa has phenomenal resources. Win-win for Putin. Yeah, both Russia and Africa have phenomenal resources. Yes, Africa's the second largest continent. Yes. Okay, anybody else?
Mm,
Oh, we also need people to do clips for us. We need lots and lots of clips because people are not viewing these streams.
yep, and doing my own with the shows that I've been
Yeah,
doing
I
and
know, but you need more.
yeah, breaking down stuff even further. But yeah,
You
but
certainly
it's
need
hard. I
help
know,
in that particular.
but I just know. Well, that's it. People are busy, and it's hard. It's hard on people because it's time consuming, as you know yourself. It's time consuming.
It's very time consuming, yeah. There's no question. Andy Kane says Africa's phenomenal resources win-win for Putin. Ghostart says The red hat gives you away, Joe. Face, a green face smiling. That's the rules. Body blue raised arms. Raised arms. The red hat gives me away. Yes, the red beret for Medicare for All gives me away. Okay, folks, it's been a pleasure.
Okay, Andy Candy says
Andy
I
says
have
I have
grandkids.
grandkids day and night. Not much time either. My apologies. Oh, gee, Andy Candy, I didn't know you were watching your grandkids. I thought those were your kids. Gee. Okay. Anyway, thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you. And we'll
And
see you
we'll
tomorrow.
tomorrow. I'll have another Dump the Corruption show tomorrow. And Dee will have another Around the World with Dee and Friends show tomorrow.
Yes, it'll be a surprise as usual. I usually don't know. For the most part, most times I don't know ahead of time. But yeah, we'll be on at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And I'd really enjoy you coming to see the show. Joe will be there, and sometimes Madeline is with us. Wow, 14
And he's
grandkids.
got 14 grandkids.
Oh my God.
So she's busy watching the grandkids, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we have some people who live, okay, in my building. There's one who has even more than 14 grandkids.
She had 4 husbands.
No, I'm thinking of Dot,
Oh,
who's had only one husband, but
okay.
she has, I believe, 17 grandkids.
Wow. That's true.
Yeah. Okay, so everybody, good night. Good night, Dee, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for being on my show.
I think
And if anybody hasn't had a chance, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share.
And don't forget to buy us some coffees, please. And in my
And
case,
good night, Bonnie.
visit my Patreon page occasionally. Okay,
Yes.
good night, everybody.
Good night.
And we